My family secretly sold my apartment without my permission, so I exposed the one legal document that ruined their lives. You have 30 days to leave, my mother said with a smirk, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against my kitchen counter. We sold your apartment to Lisa. I stood in my bright kitchen, the same kitchen where I had hosted countless family meals, built my catering business from nothing, and cared for my grandmother in her final days. The morning sunlight stretched long shadows across the wooden floor she had helped me restore, making everything feel almost unreal. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 35 years old, I never thought I would be forced out of my own home, by my own family. Don't look so surprised, my brother James added, standing beside our mother with his arm wrapped around his wife Lisa's shoulders. You're barely ever home anyway, always traveling for work. Lisa needs a real place to live now that the baby's on the way. The baby, of course. Lisa's pregnancy had become the family's newest excuse to hand my brother whatever he wanted, just like they always had since we were kids. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the small flicker of doubt that passed across my mother's face at my calm reaction. And you thought selling my home was the best idea? That's interesting. Well, it's not technically yours, my mother replied, pulling out a stack of documents. Your father and I kept our names on the deed when you moved in, remember? For tax reasons. She smiled, her expression turning smug. We signed the sale agreement yesterday. Lisa and James will take ownership in 30 days. I thought back to the last conversation I had with my grandmother, just weeks before she passed away. She had been sitting in this very kitchen, her eyes still sharp despite her declining health, watching as I kneaded dough for her favorite bread. They're going to try to take this from you, she warned. Your mother never forgave me for keeping this building instead of handing it to her when she married your father. The apartment had been in my grandmother's family for generations, along with the entire building. It was a gorgeous pre-war property in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. My mother had spent her whole life believing she would inherit it, but my grandmother had other plans. I know what you did with the money I gave you, she told me that day, approval in her voice. You invested it. You built something real. Unlike James with his endless failed businesses or Lisa with her little Instagram brand. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Keep this somewhere safe. Don't say anything unless you absolutely have to. Now, standing in my kitchen, facing my family's betrayal, I felt the weight of that envelope sitting in my desk upstairs. Actually, I said, keeping my voice even, we should probably talk about something first. I turned and walked toward my office, hearing their impatient sighs behind me. My mother had never liked that I turned the second bedroom into a workspace. A proper woman should have a proper guest room, she used to say. When I returned, I was holding my own folder, slightly worn but carefully organized. Before we discuss me moving out, I said, placing it on the counter, you might want to look at this first. What is that? Lisa asked, speaking for the first time. She looked uncomfortable, one hand resting on her barely visible baby bump. The real deed, I answered, setting the papers in front of them, and proof that I also own the building next door. My mother's face turned pale as she read the documents. 2 properties, both legally transferred to me 3 years ago, signed and notarized with my grandmother's signature. The apartment had never belonged to my parents. My grandmother had only left their names on the rental agreement to avoid conflict, but the ownership had always been mine. This isn't possible, my mother stammered, her confident expression finally breaking. Oh, it's very real, I said calmly. Mr. Patterson handled everything personally. The mention of my grandmother's trusted lawyer made my mother flinch. You might want to double-check that sale you just made to Lisa and James, I added, tilting my head. It's hard to sell something you don't own. James snatched the papers, his face turning red. You knew this whole time? You let us go through with the sale? I found out what you were planning weeks ago, I admitted. Grandmother always told me that people reveal their true selves when they think they've won. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. Lisa had dropped onto one of the bar stools, looking unwell. My mother kept staring at the deed, as if sheer willpower could make it change. You should have told us, she finally said, her voice tight with anger. Like how you should have told me you were selling my home, I replied. The home I've lived in for 10 years? The home where I took care of grandmother when none of you would? Memories flooded back, long nights struggling to balance my catering business while also caring for my grandmother. James had been too busy chasing another doomed business venture to help. During the most difficult months, my parents conveniently chose to be away, continuing their lives as usual while I put mine on hold. They were confident that, in the end, they would be the ones to take control of the building. What are we supposed to do now? Lisa asked softly. We already sold our apartment. I felt a slight pang of sympathy for her. Lisa had always seemed caught up in my family's dynamics, constantly trying to keep everyone happy. I'm not heartless, I said. The building next door has a vacant unit on the 3rd floor. Same layout as this one, actually. You can rent it, at market price. Rent? James burst out. From my own sister? Would you rather look for something else in the area? I asked with a calm expression. I hear the new luxury building down the street has openings. Of course, their 2-bedroom units start at twice the price I'm offering. My mother suddenly stood up, her hands trembling as she gathered her papers. This isn't over, she said, though there was little confidence in her voice. Your grandmother had no right. She had every right, I interrupted. This building was her legacy, and she made her own decisions about who would inherit it. I glanced at my watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with my property manager to discuss upgrading the security system. I watched them leave, James avoiding my gaze, Lisa hesitating as if she wanted to say something before following the others. My mother was the last to go, pausing in the doorway. You've changed, she said, though I couldn't tell if it was a complaint or a realization. No, I replied. I've just stopped pretending to be what you wanted me to be. Once they were gone, I walked through my apartment, running my fingers along the walls my grandmother and I had painted together, looking out the windows where we had watched countless sunsets. In my office, I pulled open a drawer and took out her envelope. It was now empty of the important documents, but still held her final letter to me. Remember, she had written, sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is letting people face the consequences of their own actions. I smiled, realizing she had predicted this outcome years ago. My phone buzzed. A message from Lisa. Can we talk about the apartment next door? Just us. Maybe. Perhaps some good could still come from all of this. But first, I had a security system to upgrade. Grandmother always believed that staying prepared was just as important as being prepared. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. I had responsibilities to handle, a catering business to manage, properties to oversee, and a family to keep at a distance. But for now, I stood in my kitchen, in my home, letting myself enjoy the quiet satisfaction of standing my ground. In the days that followed, I found myself dealing with unexpected chaos. First, there were the furious phone calls from my father, who had, unsurprisingly, been absent during the initial confrontation. Your mother is devastated, he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of disappointment. How could you humiliate the family like this? I was in my catering kitchen, putting the final touches on a wedding cake when his call came through. Humiliate the family? I repeated, carefully piping rosettes onto the 3-tiered cake. By owning property, or by stopping you from illegally selling my home? Don't be difficult, Sarah. We were just trying to help your brother. Family supports family. Interesting, I said, stepping back to examine my work. I don't remember any of you supporting me when I was sleeping on a cot in grandmother's room during her last months, or when I was struggling to start my business. From nothing, his silence spoke volumes. Eventually, he let out a tired sigh. Your mother wants to meet with a lawyer to challenge the deed. She can try, I said evenly. Mr. Patterson has every document, along with video footage of grandmother signing the papers and explaining her decisions. But if you'd rather waste money on legal fees instead of facing reality, that's up to you. After he hung up, I received an unexpected visitor. Lisa stood awkwardly in my kitchen doorway, looking much smaller without James or my mother beside her. One hand rested on her barely visible baby bump. Can we talk? She asked hesitantly. She lifted a bag from my favorite bakery. I brought something as a peace offering. I pointed to a stool by the prep counter. Those had better be their lemon tarts. She gave a small smile and opened the familiar white box. And chocolate croissants. I remember you eating these for stress during wedding season last year. For a moment, we sat quietly. The warm smell of butter and sugar mixed with the sweet scent of the vanilla cake I had been working on. Finally, Lisa spoke. I didn't know, she said softly, about any of this. James told me your parents were giving us the apartment as a gift for the baby. I never thought... She stopped, looking unsure. You never thought they were trying to take it from me, I finished for her. She flinched but gave a small nod. James said they talked to you and that you were okay with moving somewhere smaller since your business keeps you so busy. She picked at a croissant, avoiding my eyes. I should have asked you myself. I thought about Lisa, the woman who had joined our family 4 years ago, full of hope, eager to make everyone happy. I had seen how my mother and James slowly shaped her into what they wanted. They encouraged her to leave her teaching job because a good wife doesn't need to work. They pushed her toward expensive tastes because looking good matters in this family. The apartment next door, I said, surprising myself. The offer still stands. 3rd floor, same layout. The last tenants just moved out, and I was planning to fix it up before listing it. Lisa's head lifted, hope flashing in her eyes. Really? Even after everything that happened? On one condition, I said firmly. This stays between us. No family interference, no telling my mother every little thing. If you and James want to rent it, this is strictly business. I'll give you a fair price, but I expect it to be professional. James won't like that, she admitted. He believes family shouldn't have to pay family. And how has that worked out for him? I asked, thinking of all the businesses he had started and failed, each one funded by our parents. Maybe it's time to try something different. Lisa was silent for a long time, her hand resting on her belly. Can I see it? The apartment? I grabbed my keys. No better time than now. The building next door was an exact copy of mine, built in the 1920s by the same architect. The third-floor unit needed some work. Scratched hardwood floors, an outdated kitchen, but it had a strong foundation. Large windows let in plenty of sunlight, and the layout was perfect for a growing family. It's beautiful, Lisa whispered, running her fingers along the original crown molding. Even in this condition, it's beautiful. It needs some updates, I agreed. But I was already planning a full renovation. If you're interested, you could help choose the finishes. Make it your own. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. Why are you being so kind to me after what we did to you? Because you're the only one who has apologized, I said simply. And because I think you're finally ready to make your own choices instead of letting them decide for you. At that moment, both our phones buzzed. I had muted the family group chat days ago, but my mother had sent a new message. Your father and I have made decisions about both properties. We are having an emergency family meeting this weekend. Everyone must attend. Lisa read the message, then looked at me, fear in her eyes. What are they planning? I deleted the message without reading further. It doesn't matter. They don't own these buildings. They can make all the plans they want. James will expect me to go, she said quietly. They'll all expect us to stand together against you. And what do you want? I asked. She looked around the apartment again, seeing its potential. I want to make my own choices, she finally said. I want my baby to grow up in a home that is truly ours, even if we're renting, not in something that was taken from someone else. I pulled out my phone and started writing an email to my contractor. I can have renovation plans ready by next week. Standard lease, fair market rent, first month free while the work is being done. But Lisa, I waited until she met my gaze. This has to be your decision, not James's, not my mother's, yours. She straightened her shoulders, looking more confident than I had seen her in years. I'd like to see those plans when they're ready, she said. As we made our way back downstairs, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from my father. Your mother is looking into legal options. Don't force us to take this further. I showed the message to Lisa, who shook her head. They really don't know when to stop, do they? No, I agreed, but they're about to learn. Seeing the determination on Lisa's face, I realized something was changing. The family dynamics that had once seemed unshakable were starting to crumble, revealing new possibilities beneath the surface. Maybe this wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. Maybe it was about breaking old patterns that should have been broken a long time ago. Want to help me finish decorating that wedding cake? I asked Lisa. I remember you used to be really good at arranging flowers, before my mother decided it wasn't sophisticated enough for you. This time, her smile was genuine. I'd like that. And Sarah, thank you. Not just for the apartment, but for showing me that there's another way to handle things. As we walked back to my kitchen, my grandmother's words echoed in my mind once again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about showing others how to break free too. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' large suburban house. I hadn't planned to go until Lisa called me in tears the night before. They're up to something, she whispered. James keeps having secret calls with your father's lawyer. They're talking about challenging the inheritance, saying your grandmother wasn't in her right mind when she signed everything over to you. I sat in my office looking at a framed photo of my grandmother and me at my catering company's grand opening. Let them try, I said calmly. Mr. Patterson has video recordings of every meeting and every signature. Grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. There's more, Lisa continued hesitantly. They want to use my pregnancy, claiming we have more right to the properties, because we're starting a family. James doesn't know I'm telling you this. I thought about Lisa, how for the first time she was standing up to my family, choosing truth over blind loyalty. Thank you for warning me, I said. Will you be there tomorrow? Yes, she said firmly, and I'm done playing their games. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air my grandmother would have loved. I pulled up to my parents' house exactly on time, noting the line of cars parked outside. The whole family was here. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My mother sat in her favorite chair like a queen presiding over her court, my father standing behind her. James paced near the window, while various aunts and uncles filled the remaining seats. Lisa sat slightly apart from the group, meeting my gaze as I entered. "Sarah," my mother greeted me coolly. "So glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, choosing to remain standing, though I have to wonder why we're here, since the property situation is already settled. My father stepped forward, holding a folder I immediately recognized. "We've been reviewing the circumstances of your grandmother's decisions," he said. "Our lawyer has concerns about her state of mind in her final months." "Really?" I kept my voice calm. "You mean the months when I was taking care of her while all of you were too busy? You manipulated her," James snapped. "Turned her against us while she was vulnerable." Before I could respond, Lisa stood up. "No, she didn't," she said, her voice steady. "I was there sometimes, remember? When none of you bothered to visit? Grandmother was as sharp as ever. She knew exactly what she was doing." The room fell silent. James stared at his wife in disbelief. "Lisa, sit down. This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it?" she countered, stepping closer to me. "You're trying to steal a home and using our baby as an excuse. I won't be part of it." My mother's expression darkened. "Lisa, dear, you're emotional. Pregnancy hormones can—" "Don't!" Lisa interrupted sharply. "Don't dismiss me. Sarah offered us a beautiful apartment, fair rent, a chance to build our own home. But that's not enough for you, is it? You have to control everything." I pulled out my phone, queuing up a video. "Before we go any further," I said, "you should watch something." I connected my phone to the TV, and suddenly, my grandmother's face filled the screen. "I'm recording this," she said in the video, "because I know my daughter. She never forgave me for not handing her control of the buildings when she got married. But property isn't just about ownership, it's about responsibility. Sarah understands that. She's built something real, helped others do the same. These properties belong to her, fully and legally. Any attempt to challenge this will only expose your own greed." The video continued, showing her clearly stating her wishes, signing the legal documents, with Mr. Patterson verifying everything. When it ended, the silence in the room was deafening. "There's more," I said quietly. "Years of records. Would you like to see the medical evaluations confirming her mental competence? The witness statements? How far do you want to take this?" My father's folder slipped from his hands, while my mother's face turned pale, but it was James who caught me off guard. "You knew," he said to Lisa. "You knew about the apartment next door. You've been talking to her." Lisa stood tall, her expression unwavering. "Yes, because she's the only one who has been truthful, the only one who gave us a real opportunity, not lies and manipulation." "The renovation plans are ready," I added, "if you're still interested. But this ends now. No more disputes, no more threats. The buildings belong to me, and that's final." My mother abruptly got to her feet. "I think you should all leave. We need time to process this." As we stepped outside, Lisa caught my arm. "I'd love to see those renovation plans," she said, making sure everyone inside could hear. "For our new home." The autumn sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. Lisa and I walked toward our cars, leaving behind the muffled sounds of arguments from inside the house. "You know they'll never forgive us," she said. I thought about my grandmother's words, about responsibility, about creating something meaningful. "Maybe not," I replied, "but we'll build something better." 6 months later, I stood in the newly remodeled apartment next door, watching Lisa arrange a bouquet of fresh flowers in the sunlit kitchen. Her baby bump was much more noticeable now, and the nursery down the hall was fully prepared. The renovations had completely transformed the space. Warm wooden floors, open and airy rooms, and a kitchen that could rival mine. The marble countertops were worth every penny, Lisa said, adjusting a flower stem in her arrangement. She had rekindled her love for flower arranging, even starting a small side business making centerpieces for my catering events. "Though James is still getting used to paying rent," she added with a smirk. The months after the family confrontation had brought major shifts. Faced with the possibility of losing both Lisa's support and his parents' financial backing, James had finally taken a real job at a consulting firm. He still wasn't speaking to me, but Lisa told me he was different now, more grounded, less entitled. My parents had gone through phases, first ignoring me, then trying to guilt-trip me with tears, and finally, reluctantly coming to terms with reality. The real shift happened during the holidays. My mother had shown up at my door, looking older and more uncertain than I had ever seen her. "I've been thinking about what your grandmother said," she admitted, avoiding my gaze. "About responsibility, about building something meaningful." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I never built anything. I just assumed things would always be handed to me." Now, as I watched Lisa prepare for her baby shower, the first family gathering since the fallout, I reflected on just how much had changed. "Your mother RSVP'd," Lisa said, as if reading my thoughts. She asked if she could bring her lemon squares. I raised an eyebrow. The famous lemon squares? The ones she's never shared the recipe for? Lisa grinned. She even offered to teach me how to make them. Baby steps, I said with a chuckle. My phone buzzed. A message from my property manager about a longtime tenant needing maintenance work. Under my leadership, both buildings had flourished. I had even started a program to help small business owners rent commercial spaces at fair rates, giving new entrepreneurs a chance to grow. Miss Mitchell! A familiar voice called from the hallway. It was Maria, one of my commercial tenants who ran a successful alterations shop in the building. She smiled as she held up a bag. I brought the curtains for the nursery, she said, and some empanadas, made with your grandmother's recipe. This was the community my grandmother had dreamed of, people supporting each other, creating something together. As Lisa and Maria discussed the curtains, sharing food and stories, I quietly stepped away to my own apartment. In my office, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out my grandmother's last letter. The paper was worn from years of handling, but her words remained as powerful as ever. Property is more than just bricks and walls. It's about creating spaces where people can grow, where communities can thrive. You understand that in a way your mother never did. A knock on my door pulled me away from my thoughts. When I opened it, I was surprised to see James standing there. Can we talk? He asked, looking uneasy but determined. About everything. We sat in my kitchen, the same place where all of this had begun months ago. James stared into his coffee cup, thinking, Lisa is happier than I've ever seen her, he finally said. The apartment, her flower business, even the way she stands. Up to Mom now. I didn't realize how much we were all being controlled by their expectations. And what about you? I asked carefully. I'm learning, he admitted. Having a real job, real responsibilities, it's different. Sometimes it's hard, but it's better. He looked up at me. I'm sorry, Sarah, for trying to take your home. For not standing up to them sooner. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my property manager, this time about a small bakery wanting to expand. Want to see something? I asked James. Something grandmother understood. Long before I did. I led him downstairs to the commercial spaces, introducing him to Maria at her alterations shop, to Mr. Chen at his small bookstore, and to the new art gallery that displayed work from local artists. Each place held a story, a dream being built. This is what it's really about, I explained. Not just owning buildings, but creating spaces where people can grow and succeed on their own. James was quiet for a moment. Like Lisa with her flowers, he finally said. Like you with your catering business. Exactly. I turned to face him. The apartment was never just about having a place to live. It was about the freedom to build something of your own. Later that evening, as I helped Lisa prepare for the baby shower, I thought about family. Not just the one we're born into, but the one we create. Maria had brought more empanadas, Mr. Chen had sent some of his special teas for the party, and even my mother had called, asking if she could come early to help set up. I invited grandmother's old friends, Lisa said as she arranged a name, cards on the gift table. They keep asking about you. They're proud of how you've handled everything. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, but something felt different. Through the window, I saw the early sunlight touch both buildings, while the streets filled with people heading to work and school. In just a few hours, family and friends would gather to celebrate new beginnings. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from my mother. Need help setting up. I brought the lemon squares and the recipe. I smiled, remembering grandmother's words about responsibility and growth. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting what belongs to you. It's about creating space for others to grow into better versions of themselves. Outside, the city was waking up. Soon, my home would be filled with voices, laughter, and the warmth of people coming together. The buildings stood strong as they had for generations, but now they held new stories and fresh dreams. That, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. Looking at them now, I finally understood what grandmother had known all along. It was never about keeping people out. It was about creating something valuable, something worth protecting. A legacy, not just of property, but of possibility. The morning sun reflected off the windows, making them glow in the soft light. Below, Maria was opening her shop, Mr. Chen was setting up his book display, and Lisa was probably already awake, arranging flowers for the shower. This was what true success looked like. Not just winning a fight, but creating something better because of it. Something that would last long after the arguments were forgotten. I opened my group chat with Lisa and Maria. Breakfast before the chaos starts? I'm making coffee. Their replies came quickly, excited and warm. In my kitchen, I started the coffee maker, set out fresh pastries, and opened the windows to let in the crisp morning air. This was home, not just my apartment, but the entire community we had built. And this time, it was built on a foundation strong enough to last.